I remember once when I was a kid, I asked my mom if I could go out and play. And she said, "Did you finish your homework?" I said, "No." And she said, "You can't go out and play until you finish your homework." Well, about 5 minutes later, I went to my dad and I said, "Can I go out and play?" And he said, "Sure." So I went out and played, and I came back in after 15 minutes, and mom said, "I can't believe you did that. You didn't accept my word. You just went to dad to try to get around me." And I got punished for doing that. Yeah, I wasn't really interested in what my father's will was for my life at that point in time. I just wanted to get permission from him to do what I wanted to do. A lot of kids do that with their parents. If they don't like what they get from one, they go to the other. We kind of see something of the sort in Numbers chapter 22, where I think Balaam the prophet is less concerned deep down with doing the Father's will and more interested in trying to get the Father to go along with what he wants to do. We'll pick up the action in Numbers chapter 22. The Israelites have just defeated the Bashanites and the Amorites in great victories that God orchestrated, and they're getting closer to the promised land. This is probably the 38th year in the wilderness. And now they're getting close to the land of Moab on the northeast side of the Dead Sea. And Balak, the king of Moab, is getting scared. These Israelites, they're huge. There must be almost 2 million of them. They're too numerous. We won't be able to overpower them. We know that they are blessed by their God. Maybe I can go to the prophet Balaam and get him to pronounce a curse on them, and then maybe I could beat him. Let's pick up the action. Verse 1 of chapter 22. Then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab. That's the northern part of just north of the Dead Sea, southern part of Palestine, and camped along the Jordan across from the Jericho. So they were on the east side of the Jordan River, not actually in the promised land. Verse 2, now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. The Moabites said to the elders of Midian, "This horde is going to lick up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field." So Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab, sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor, near the Euphrates River in his native land. Now that's probably, I don't know, 75, 80 miles north, 100 miles north in Syria. He's going out of his way to try to get this prophet. This prophet has a reputation for being able to speak words for a fee that are favorable to your situation. Verse 5, Balak said, "A people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me." Verse 6, now Balaam, come and put a curse on these people because they're too powerful for me. Perhaps then I'll be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you cursed is cursed. You know, that's what the Bible says about God. You know, God told Abram in Genesis 12:3, "I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you." So Balak, the king of Moab, is looking at Balaam like he has the power of God to do what only God can do. So there's a problem already right there. And the other problem is that God has already said in his word that he will bless the people of Israel and they will be a blessing. Genesis 12:2. So already we have a conflict between the wills of evil men and the will of God. Verse 7, the elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them the fee for divination. So it was ordinary to pay a fee for a prophet to inquire of a god. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak had said. Now Balaam should know, being that he knows the God of Israel, or knows of the God of Israel, that God's will is to bless the people of Israel. But look at what he says. Verse 8, spend the night here, and I will report back to you with the answer the Lord gives me. To me, that shows that in this particular instance that Balaam is probably more concerned with the fee than he is with the father. He's more considered with the payout than he is with the permissive will of God. So the Moabite officials stayed with him. Verse 9, God came to Balaam. Just because somebody is not praying in accordance with the will of God doesn't mean that God doesn't reserve the right to sovereignly act within that situation. God can act independently of a person's will or rebellion. God said, who are these men with you? Well, God knows everything, so he knows who the men are, right? But he's asking Balaam so that he can realize that he could say out loud what he should already know, that these people are enemies of God's people. Verse 10, Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people that have come out of Egypt covers the face of the land. Now come and put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I'll be able to fight them and drive them away. Verse 12, God could have said, I'm not even going to entertain a request like that. You should know that I promised in my word that Israel would be blessed. You should know that I promised in my word that Shiloh will come out of Judah and the obedience of the people will be his. Genesis 49, verse 10. You should know that I have, and it's interesting. God could have said that. And later on in chapter 24, we'll get there on Friday, he's going to give a magnificent prophecy reinforcing what he's already said, that these people are blessed and that the Messiah is going to come from them. And God didn't have to do that. But instead of brushing Balaam off, he gives him a clear word. Verse 12, don't go with them. You must not put a curse on those people because they are blessed. That should have been it. Case closed. Verse 13, Balaam got up and said to Balak's officials, go back to your own country. The Lord has refused to let me go with you. Well, way to go, Balaam, at this point in time. That was the right thing to do. Verse 14, so the Moabite officials returned to Balak and said, Balaam refused to come with us. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention, Balaam didn't say, I don't want to go. He said, the Lord won't let me go. Perhaps Balak interpreted that as Balaam leaving the door open for Balak to say, maybe I should try a little harder. Maybe I should sweeten the pot a little bit. Just a thought. Verse 15, Balak sent other officials, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. Well, let's try to butter the bread a little bit. Then maybe Balaam might help us out. Verse 16, they came to Balaam and said, this is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Don't let anything keep you from coming to me. Don't even let God keep you from coming to me, is what he's saying. Because I will reward you handsomely. God didn't promise that he would reward you for not coming, but the difference between me and God, Balaam, is that I will reward you handsomely and do whatever you say. God is not going to capitulate and do whatever Balaam says. But Balak says, I'll do everything you say. This is like the serpent tempting Eve all over again. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Come and put a curse on these people for me. Verse 18, look at this wheeling and dealing going on here. Even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. So, he's throwing, he didn't specifically mention silver or gold. Balaam threw that out there. Even if you gave me silver and gold, all that you had, I couldn't go beyond the command of the Lord my God. Now, if he'd have just shut up there, Balaam might have been in the will of God, but look what he says in verse 19. Now spend the night here so that I can find out what else the Lord will tell me. There is no what else. God said, don't go. I have blessed these people. Do not curse them. So to me, this proves that Balaam's heart is not totally with God. God already said no, but let me go back again. Kind of like the kid who got a big fat no from his mom, but then he slyly goes on the side to ask Dad to try to get from Dad what he really wants. That's what he's doing. He's trying to get around. Verse 20, that night God came to Balaam. Didn't have to do that. But he said, since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you. You go, well, it worked. He manipulated God. He changed his mind, and now God's going to give him what he wants. Is that really what's happening here? Did you know that sometimes God's biggest blessings are unanswered prayers, and sometimes God's biggest judgments are when he says yes? I was just reading something like that in David Guzik's commentary. When God says no to you, it's because he loves you. When you continue to rebel and God permits you to do something, that means he's going to judge you. He's going to teach you a lesson. He's going to give you what you want to see that it's not always a good idea to have what you want. That's what's going on here. Verse 21, Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the Moabite officials. He's probably thinking, it's working out. God is going to let me get rich off of this. Woohoo! No. Verse 22, God was very angry when he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, it turned off the road into a field. Balaam beat it to get it back on the road. The donkey has more sense than the prophet. The donkey is more spiritually sensitive to God than Balaam is. The angel of the Lord, verse 24, stood in a narrow path through the vineyards with walls on both sides. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it. You know, the donkey is not only trying to save itself, it's trying to save Balaam from the judgment of God. So he beat the donkey again. I think Guzik said in his commentary that the donkey in some ways is like the faithful believer that is obedient to God but is sometimes mistreated by others or something like that. I'll look it up later. Verse 26, then the angel of the Lord moved on ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no room to turn, either to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and he was angry, and he beat it with its staff. Remember in church on Sunday, we talked about the different uses of the staff? Well, this is a misuse of the staff, to beat your own animal for no good reason. Then verse 28, the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and it said to Balaam, what have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times? And you're thinking, yeah, right, a talking donkey. Give me a break. How could that happen? And I was tempted to say, I see that all the time on the news. I see a lot of talking. And Jeannie said, don't say that. I was going to use the other word instead of donkey, but Jeannie said, don't say that either. I'm going to listen to Jeannie. Verse 29, Balaam answered the donkey, you have made a fool of me. You know, that's not what I would have said. I would have been like, a talking donkey. Wow. God's trying to tell me something. This is amazing. But Balaam is so out of his mind with anger, he's yelling at his own donkey. You made a fool out of me. You know, it's funny how God used a donkey to make a donkey out of Balaam. You can replace the word donkey with the other word for donkey, but I'm not going to do that. Verse 30, the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" Balaam said, "No." Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his sword drawn. And so he bowed down and fell face down. He ended up doing what the donkey did first. He knelt down before the presence of God's messenger angel. Verse 32, the angel of the Lord asked him, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I have come here to oppose you, because your path is a reckless one before me." Some have made the parallel between Balaam and Simon Peter, that 3 times Balaam resisted the will of God and beat his donkey, just as Peter 3 times denied Jesus. But other than the number 3, the parallel is not all that great. Verse 33, the donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If it had not turned away, I would certainly have killed you by now, but I would have spared her. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I've sinned. I did not realize you were standing in the road to oppose me." Yes, he has sinned, but it makes it sound like he would have done it anyway if the angel had not been there. Again, this is revealing that Balaam's heart is not totally in tune with God. And look at what the book of Jude tells us many centuries later about Balaam. I got to show you this. Jude verse 11, "Woe to these false teachers. They have taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error." Those false prophets in the New Testament were more about the payout than about the prohibitions and commands of God. That's what Balaam's error is here. He's more interested in the money than in the marvelous God of the universe. Verse 35, the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you." So Balaam went with Balak's officials. Verse 36 and 37, Balak goes all the way to the Moabite town on the border to meet Balaam. He's so anxious to get this prophet to curse Israel that he himself travels all the way to the border to meet him. Can you imagine President Biden going all the way to the border to meet some dignitary coming over? That's what's going on here. And then he yells at him. He says, "Didn't I send you an urgent summons? Why didn't you come to me? Am I really not able to reward you?" And Balaam should have said again, God is the one who rewards. God is the one we should be listening to. But Balaam's heart isn't right. He says in verse 38, "Well, I have come to you now, but I can't say whatever I please. I must speak only what God puts in my mouth." That's because God's really riding him. Balaam might have been riding the donkey, but God is riding Balaam and saying, "You better do this right." Verse 39, then Balaam went with Balak to Kiriath Huzoth. Balak sacrificed cattle and sheep, gave some to Balaam. Verse 41, the next morning Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal, and from there he could see the outskirts of the Israelite camp. So he's probably in the area of Mount Nebo, overlooking the Israelites in the valley on the northeast side of the Dead Sea. What will Balaam do? Will he obey the Lord and speak words of blessing on the Israelites? Or will he disobey the Lord because he wants the money? That's what we're going to find out. And what about you? What's the most important thing in your life? Is it getting what you want at all costs? Or is the most important thing in your life what Almighty God says? You can almost see the civil war going on in Balaam. I really want what I want, but I can't do what God doesn't want me to do. I want what I want, but I really can't do. Do you have that war going on inside you? This is what I want you to do. I want you to say, "God, I'm making a decision today to seek first your kingdom and your righteousness and trust that over the course of time, you will bless me in the way you deem is best. I'm trusting you. My relationship with you is more important than all the money in the world, than all the earthly desires in the world. Give your life to the one who gave his life for you. Jesus loves you. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. It's wonderful to be back. Tomorrow we continue with the adventures of Balaam the prophet in Numbers 23. Have a great day, everybody.